من يضلل فلا هادي له واشهد ان لا اله الا الله وحده لا شريك له واشهد ان محمدا عبده ورسوله. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي امري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. Assalamu alaikum and thank you for coming. While the update is going on, we'll try to recap from memory, inshallah. So last time I spoke about the period after the Battle of Al-Ahzab, Al-Khandaq, the 6 months after the battle, or even the first year actually after the battle. So the consequences of the battle, the Islamic victory of the battle was that afterwards the Prophet made a famous hadith, Al-An naghzum wa la yaghzuna nahnu nasiru alayhim. So up until that battle, Quraysh had been on the offensive, sending for armies to fight the Muslims. That battle was a turning point, and from that point onwards it would be the Muslims who would be taking the offensive to the mushrikeen, the Quraysh. After the battle, Prophet immediately after that battle, the Prophet went to punish the last remaining Jewish tribe in Medina, Bani Qurayza, and that was another second victory. That battle, the siege of Bani Qurayza, lasted almost as long as the battle of Khandaq itself. So Khandaq took about 1 month, the siege of Bani Qurayza 25 days. And then after that, it was like a second victory. And that increased the Muslim power and prestige even more, the victory over Bani Qurayza. And after that, so the Prophet then proceeded to not just to project Muslim power, but to subdue some tribes that were threatening the Muslims. There's some tribes that had assisted the Ahzab army by contributing to the Ahzab army, by punishing them. Other tribes that year prior to Battle of Ahzab, they had sent delegations to the Prophet to ask him to send teachers, Islamic teachers, to teach them about Islam. And these tribes, instead of welcoming them, they killed them all, those teachers. So the Prophet went to punish those tribes. After one particular campaign, there was one leader of a tribe who actually was on his way to Medina in disguise. He was the leader of his tribe. He was in disguise with the intention of killing the Prophet, to assassinate him. And instead he was captured by the Muslims and he was brought before the Prophet, and the Rasulullah, instead of punishing him, he kept him as a captive but inside the mosque for 3 whole days. So this leader his name was Thumama. He stayed inside the mosque for 3 days observing the Muslims, and he had a conversation with the Prophet in which he said there were three options. Either the Prophet Muslims could kill him, in which case his own tribe would get revenge, or the Muslims could release him unharmed without ransom, or the third option would be to release him but with a ransom. After 3 days, the Prophet released him without ransom, and this leader left the mosque. He went somewhere, he washed himself, he did his ghusl, he came back to the Prophet and converted to Islam. And he was waiting for the Prophet to release him so that he could, in order to convert, so that he could say that he converted to Islam not under duress. He converted as a free man. And he asked the Prophet what to do. He said he wanted to go do Umrah. So the Prophet permitted him to go do Umrah. He went, this leader, all the way to Mecca to do Umrah, and he even threatened the leaders of Quraysh, said, I'm going to boycott you. And of course there's nothing they could do about it. He was the leader of a powerful tribe. He said he was going to boycott them. So he boycotted them, and this boycott was so effective on Quraysh that they had to send a delegation to the Prophet to ask this man to kindly stop the boycott. So this was only a short period after Khandaq, within maybe a few months. So after Khandaq, Muslim power was on the ascendancy. Not only by the Prophet was not just projecting Muslim power, but as I said, subduing tribes, but also creating new alliances with other tribes. One particular tribe that the Prophet went out to punish was Bani Mustaliq. They defeated the tribe, they had them captive, and one of the women there was female captives, would later become, I don't remember her name, the Prophet would marry her and she became al-Mu'mineen. That particular campaign, Bani Mustaliq, was on the way back. After the campaign, it was a successful campaign for the Muslims, but on the way back, the hypocrites, they would join the army, were causing trouble. So, and a couple of instances. The first one was Abdullah ibn Ubay, the leader of the hypocrites, who was in the army. On the way back, he was saying to the other Muslims, he said, when we go back to Medina, the powerful one, talking about himself, is going to expel the weaker one, talking about the Prophet. And Allah recorded that conversation in the Quran. Another example of the hypocrites causing problems is Seerah Lesson radiallahu anha. She fell behind the army, or I think she was looking for a necklace that she lost in the desert, and she wandered off, strayed a bit far away from the army, and by the time she came back, the army had left, except for one person, one Sahabi. And so the Sahabi accompanied Seerah Lesson all the way back to Medina, and because they were traveling together pretty much alone, rumors started to spread, some vicious rumors about Seerah Lesson being unfaithful to the Prophet ﷺ. So for 1 month the Prophet stayed away from her, and because of these rumors, but finally Allah sent down verses from the Quran to confirm her innocence. But this was again something that the hypocrites were only too happy to create chaos and misinformation about the Muslims. So today, inshallah, I wanted to talk about the lead up to the Treaty of Hudaybiyah. The Treaty of Hudaybiyah was a treaty very important in Islamic history, and I'll repeat this again because it was a treaty that Quraysh had agreed to with the Muslims. They agreed to recognize the Muslims as an equal partner. Before, they treated the Muslims as inferior, as something, nothing, like they could just exterminate them. Because of the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, it meant that they recognized the Muslims as a state, as an equal partner in negotiations. So, what began the whole process of the Treaty of Hudaybiyah? It was actually a dream. The Prophet had a dream, and any prophet, when they have a dream, the dream it's going to turn out to be true. Not only is it going to would it be true, it's actually it could be a command from Allah to do something. So the Prophet had a dream in which he was performing Umrah. So he informed the Sahaba that they were going to perform Umrah. So they prepared themselves and started traveling towards Mecca. Now, of course, Mecca is where Quraysh was, and Quraysh were the enemies, were the bitter enemies of the Muslims. However, the Quraysh had a problem in that the place the Muslims were going to was the Kaaba in Mecca. And the Kaaba was not just the property of Quraysh. So Quraysh were being the custodians. They protected the Kaaba, they maintained it. According to the customs of the time and the laws of the time, anybody could come to Mecca to perform pilgrimage or Umrah. Anybody, even the Prophet, according to the customs of the time. And even Quraysh had to admit to that. So the Muslims started traveling all the way to Mecca, but lightly armed. So the intention was to perform Umrah, and which meant that they were traveling with very light weapons, hardly any weapons. They weren't heavily armed. They weren't coming for a fight. They were coming to perform Umrah. They didn't want to fight anybody. So they traveled until they finally reached a place called, I think, Qura al-Ghamim. Of course, the Muslims and the Prophet traveling in the desert, they weren't trying to hide. They were just traveling, and everybody knew what was happening. Quraysh knew what was happening. Quraysh did not want the Muslims to come to Mecca and enter Mecca. So Quraysh sent out an army, an heavily armed army under the leadership of Khalid ibn al-Walid, with the intention of preventing the Muslims from coming all the way to Mecca. So the Muslims reached Qura al-Ghamim, where they met this army led by Khalid ibn al-Walid. And it was now, then when they arrived, it was time for prayer, for Dhuhr prayer. So the Muslims got up and started praying in Jama'ah behind the Prophet. And Khalid ibn al-Walid sitting and watching. This is the first time in his life he's watching Muslims pray. He's never seen Muslims pray before. And while he's watching, he notices that the Muslims at certain times throughout the prayer, they were, unaware of their surroundings. So, in ruku' or sujood, and he got the idea, this is a great opportunity to attack the Muslims and kill them. Because there's an opportunity there. They're not aware of what's happening around them, they're not on full alert. So the prayer finished. However, he asked the other people who were with him, Khalid and Walid, said, "Did the Muslims, are they going to pray again?" And somebody told him, yes, they have another prayer after this prayer, it's called the Asr prayer. So the idea was, wait until that Asr prayer, while the Muslims were praying, then he would attack them and kill them, slaughter them. And this is where there are a number of miracles that happened during this trip. This is the first miracle. At the time of Asr prayer, what happens? Any guesses?
The Prophet gets wahi.
Yes?
The type of prayer they should do during battle.
Very good. So, we call the Prophet made a slight change to the prayer, and we call it Salat al-Khawf. Basically, when you have a large group, say an army for example, and they need to be on high alert because they could be attacked at any moment, attacked and killed. So what happens? You split the army in halves. One half would pray behind the leader, the Imam, and the other half would not pray, but stand guard, watching the enemy, just in case the enemy decides to attack. So for a prayer like Zuhr prayer or Asr prayer, the Imam would then pray the first 2 rakahs, and then the people behind him, at the middle of the prayer, the tashahhud, the people behind him would finish the prayer and get up and stand watch, stand guard. And those who were standing guard first, they come and join the Prophet, or the leader, so the Imam, for the rest of the prayer. So, good. Just give me a moment and I'll log in. Hopefully this won't take long as well. So, the miracle was that Khalid ibn Walid had thought of doing that, attacking the Muslims, but he never told a single person, a single soul, what he was intending to do. So the Prophet, the same time, got that idea of this rearranging the prayer, the Salat al-Khawf. So the Asr prayer, this is how the Muslims prayed. And so Khalid had to abandon his plan. He couldn't attack the Muslims because there were some Muslims, the Muslims were on high alert, were standing guard, watching them, just in case they were decided to attack. Oops. Okay. It was at that point that the Prophet then realized, that Khalid ibn Walid realized the Muslims were being protected by Allah, and he said that the Muslims were protected, and these events would later influence Khalid, like a few months later, to convert to Islam, because he realized that the Muslims, the Prophet had to receive some sort of warning, some revelation, from Allah that he was going to do attack, so he made that rearrangement with the prayer. Another scene from the movie, The Message. The scene I just described, this is how it's portrayed in the movie, The Message. All wrong, 100% wrong. The Muslims were praying. They were not standing there watching. Like in the movie, they're all standing. The whole army was standing watching. In reality, they were praying. And the second mistake, they said the Muslims were wanted to perform Hajj. It wasn't Hajj, it was Umrah. Sorry?
What would be the translation in English?
Of what? The pilgrimage?
Hajj.
Well, I don't know. In the Arabic version, he said, they're going to perform Hajj. So, after this event, the Muslims were able to get up and detour, go around the army and continue on to Mecca. Just before they reached the outskirts of Mecca, a second miracle. You might not think it's a miracle, but I think it's a miracle. What happens? The Prophet's own camel stops moving and sits down and refuses to budge anymore. No matter what the people did, the camel would not get up and continue walking. She refused to get up, she just sat down. And this is similar to what happened years earlier when the Prophet arrived in Medina. They let the camel wander, where the camel sat, they built the mosque of the Prophet. Now, on the outskirts of Mecca, the camel sat down. The Prophet understood again. Allah was the one controlling the camel. Allah, he said, Habasaha Habis al-Fil. The same one who controlled the elephants years before the Prophet was born, Abraha and the elephants came to destroy the Kaaba. He said, Allah is the same one who stopped the camel, is controlling the camel. The Prophet understood that they were not to proceed and probably not even go to enter Mecca even. And he probably understood that there would be negotiations and that he needed to agree to any sort of agreement, treaty, in which a treaty in which they would be able to, a peace treaty that is, in which they would not have to make many concessions to the non-Muslims. So Quraysh was starting to fear the power of the Muslims. They started sending leaders, ambassadors. 3 different ambassadors: Budayl ibn Warqa al-Khuza'i, Al-Khulays ibn al-Alqama, and Urwa ibn Mas'ud. They were choosing people, not any people who were, these messengers were not from Quraysh, and they were from tribes that were friendly to the tribe of the Prophet. They were trying their best to appease the Prophet and to try and have some sort of create a dialogue with them, to try and negotiate some sort of settlement, some sort of treaty with the Muslims. Now I think it was the last one of these, Urwa ibn Mas'ud. They came and they tried to negotiate, and they weren't able to reach any conclusions, any agreements. But the last one, Urwa ibn Mas'ud, even though he failed, he went back to Quraysh and told them, let them come and do the Umrah. They have purely peaceful intentions. They're not coming here to fight you. And they're doing what's their given right, their rights according to the customs of the time. He actually Quraysh's own ambassador was telling Quraysh to let the Muslims come and do Umrah. While the messengers were going back and forth, a small group of people from Quraysh were unhappy with what was happening. They saw that Quraysh was starting to capitulate to the Muslims. So they formed a small group, I think 50 people, with the intention of going over to the Muslim side in the middle of the night and killing some Muslim people, with the intention of creating war. Because the Muslims would find, if they had been successful, the Muslims would have found some dead people being killed during the night. They would have said, Quraysh, this is because of Quraysh, we have to go to war. And this is the third miracle. These people, instead of killing Muslims, they were captured by the Muslims. Captured. And Allah even mentioned that, recorded this in the Quran. هو الذي كف أيديهم عنكم وأيديكم عنهم ببطن مكة. So he was the one held their hands from you and your hands from them in the valley of Hudaybiyah near Mecca. I've given you the upper hand of a grip of them, and Allah is all seeing what you do. So the Muslims captured them, but the Prophet decided to release them unharmed, to show that he had good intentions, peaceful intentions. And the leader of that group of people who had tried to sabotage these negotiations was Akram ibn Abi Jahl, Akram the son of Abi Jahl. So Abu Jahl was well known, the evil man, but his son Ikrimah would later convert to Islam and be a great Sahabi. He would fight in Sabilillah. Okay. So now it's time for the Prophet to nominate an ambassador. He initially was thinking of Sayyidina Umar ibn Khattab, sending Umar to negotiate. And Umar excused himself, saying that his tribe was not very strong, would not be able to protect him. So he instead suggested the Prophet send Uthman, Sayyidina Uthman ibn Affan radiallahu anhu. Uthman belonged to the tribe of Bani Umayyah. Bani Umayyah was a powerful tribe. And on top of that, Sayyidina Uthman, the Prophet loved him very much. He was the Prophet's son-in-law. And the Prophet was happy with the choice of Uthman. He sent Uthman to negotiate with Quraysh. So Uthman left and stayed in Mecca to negotiate with Quraysh. Quraysh tried to appease Uthman. They treated him very well, almost like royalty. They said he could perform Umrah if he wanted to, only to Uthman. Of course, Uthman rejected the offer. He said, I will not perform Umrah while the Prophet is not able to perform Umrah. He wanted to perform Umrah with the Prophet. He stayed in Mecca for 3 days and discussing things with Quraysh. However, in the Muslim camp, his absence was noticed. People started thinking that maybe Uthman had been killed, which meant that this was a declaration of war. When you kill an ambassador from another side, this is a declaration of war. So, what did the Muslims do? What did the Prophet do? They were thinking that maybe Uthman had been killed. And that Quraysh were now thinking that Quraysh maybe wanted to go to war. This was then the Prophet held at the pledge of Ridwan, Bayt al-Ridwan. He got the whole army, the whole group of pilgrims to pledge the pledge of Ridwan. So this was under a tree, and they all pledged to fight to the death, to defend the Prophet and until either they die or to victory. And Allah recorded this pledge in the Quran. Allah is pleased with the believers when they pledged allegiance to you, the Prophet, under the tree. He knew what was in their hearts, so He sent down serenity upon them and rewarded them with a victory at hand. So that same tree, later on, years later, would be uprooted by during the Caliphate of Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu. There was one exception, one person, one munafiq, one hypocrite amongst the group. He did not make that pledge to defend to the death, but the rest of them all pledged, and which Allah said He is pleased with these people who pledged to defend the Prophet with their lives. Now Uthman comes back, and the Muslims realize that Quraysh are not preparing for war, and instead Quraysh sent another ambassador, this time Suhail ibn Amr, to present them in the negotiations. Suhail is a member of Quraysh. So he's discussing with the Prophet this new treaty. They're going to have a peace treaty. Well, not a complete peace treaty. It was probably a truce between. They would agree to a truce between the two sides. There were four items in the treaty that they agreed to. Number one, that the Muslims would not continue to make Umrah that year, and they would return to Medina. And the following year they would come back, be permitted to come back to Mecca to perform Umrah. That's number one. Number two, there'll be a truce for 10 years. No fighting between the two sides. Number three, the people, any people around the other people, not the non-Muslims and non-Quraysh, not from Quraysh, were free to either join the ranks of the Muslims or to join Mecca, ally themselves with either side, or to convert. And the last point in the treaty was the contentious one, which, well, not contentious, what's the right word? The one that Muslims disagreed to, the Muslims, which was that anybody running away from Quraysh, like a slave, for example, and he went to the Muslims for safety, the Muslims had to return him back to Quraysh. If anybody from the Muslim side wanted to run away and join the Qurayshis, he was permitted to join Quraysh. So it was unfair from a certain point of view. The Quraysh would take anybody from the Muslims, and everybody running away from Quraysh had to be returned back to Quraysh. People were very upset. The majority of the Sahaba, nearly all of them actually, did not agree with that, and they actually disagreed with the Prophet had agreed to that all these conditions of the treaty, and they signed it. And at the time they were writing down the treaty on a piece of paper, the Prophet was dictating each one of these points to his cousin Sayyidina Ali, and Sayyidina Ali was writing them down. And he starts writing on the paper, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So Suhail ibn Amr, the Quraysh's ambassador, objected to this. He said, "Who is Ar-Rahman? I don't know who this Ar-Rahman is. I want you to change it." So the Prophet said, "Okay." He instructed Ali to write Bismika Allahumma instead of Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Fine. And then the next line says, this treaty is between Muhammad, the messenger of Allah, and then Suhail interrupted again, said, "If we had known that you were the messenger of Allah, we would not have fought against you." He objected to this again. He changed it. The Prophet instructed Ali to erase the bit that says Rasulullah and change it to, but Ali said, "I can't do this." He said he could not erase this where it said Rasulullah. So the Prophet asked Ali to indicate on the paper where it says Rasulullah, because the Prophet was illiterate. So the Prophet himself erased it, moved Rasulullah, and instructed Ali to write Muhammad, the son of Abdullah, Muhammad ibn Abdullah instead. So they will write down all this treaty, and everything was agreed. And it was at that point, Abu Jandal. Anybody heard of the name Abu Jandal before? Yes? So Abu Jandal was the son of Suhail ibn Amr. Suhail ibn Amr was not Muslim, he was the ambassador, Quraysh's ambassador. His own son Abu Jandal had converted to Islam years previously. Suhail was very upset and prevented Abu Jandal from leaving Mecca. He had actually kept him prisoner in his own home for a number of years, prevented. And partly because, he converted, but also because Abu Jandal's three other siblings had already converted to Islam and had already lived in Medina. Suhail did not want a fourth child also to convert and leave the house as well. So he kept him prisoner. However, at the point of signing the treaty, Abu Jandal had already managed to escape his captivity in Mecca, and he traveled all the way to join the Muslims, and he joined the Muslim side. However, when he arrived, it was just after the treaty had been signed. The Prophet had no choice but to release him, allow the father take his son with him back to Mecca. He tried his best to convince Suhail, to make one exception, please, but Suhail refused. And Suhail started beating his own son, beating up his son in front of everybody. At that point, the Muslims were very upset. They were almost traumatized. They couldn't believe what was happening. They could have easily have killed Suhail. They could have stopped him, but they couldn't. He was the ambassador, and according to the treaty, he had every right to take his son with him. So Sayyidina Umar ibn Khattab is seeing all this happening, and he can't control himself. But all he managed to do was to go near him, where Suhail was, not Suhail, Abu Jandal, and he tried to offer in secretly offer his sword to Abu Jandal. For Abu Jandal to take the sword and hit his own father with it. Of course, Abu Jandal didn't take the sword, and he surrendered himself to his father. Of course, it was good that Suhail was not killed, because he would do a great service to Islam a couple of years later, huge service. But as I mentioned before, the Muslims were very upset, did not agree with the treaty, especially that last point, where anybody fleeing Quraysh had to be returned back to Quraysh. And they saw firsthand what this could mean. But the Prophet, of course, he knew that he was being instructed, being ordered by Allah to agree to the treaty. So what happens then is that the Prophet had agreed to no longer perform Umrah, so he had to finish. He had to get out of his ihram. He was dressed in ihram, so to do that, he had to, shave his hair or cut his hair and slaughter an animal, a sheep or whatever, camel. So he orders the Muslims to do that. He says, get up, go, shave your heads and slaughter the animal. They all disobeyed him. Nobody listened to him. All the Muslims. He repeated this same instruction 3 times. They disobeyed him. This was very unusual in Islamic history, in the history of the Prophet. The Prophet is upset. He goes to his tent, inside his tent where his wife, Salama, I think, was inside, and he consulted his wife on what to do. He was upset. So she advised him to go and do that himself, to shave his head and slaughter the animal. And she said, they will all follow you. So he did as she advised him. And it was at that point that the Muslims they got up and followed. The Prophet did the same as him to end the state of Umrah, out of the Ihram. But this issue had not been settled. The people still did not accept, did not agree with the Prophet did, the decision. Sayyidina Umar ibn al-Khattab especially. He went to the Prophet and asked him a number of questions. He asked him, are we not following the true path? Are you not the messenger of Allah? Are you not following the true? We're not on the true path. The Prophet said, yes, I'm a messenger. Yes, we are on the true path. Then he asked him, why have we accepted this treaty, which makes us inferior, sort of, in a way? The Prophet said, is ordered by Allah. This is a commandment from Allah. Umar is still not satisfied with the Prophet's answer. He went to Abu Bakr, Sayyidina Abu Bakr. He asked him the same questions. Is not the Prophet the true messenger? Abu Bakr said yes. Are we not on the true path? He said yes. Then why have we accepted this treaty, which makes us lower, inferior, or whatever? So Abu Bakr said the same thing. This order is from Allah. So he had to accept it. He had no choice. So Umar had to accept it. At this point, Abu Basir. Does that name ring a bell, anybody? No? So Abu Basir, this is shortly after the treaty, after the events with the Sahaba. A man named Abu Basir, who was I think maybe a slave, I don't know. He escaped from Mecca and wanted to join the Muslim side. He came all the way to Medina, met the Prophet. The Prophet had no choice but to say he couldn't accept him. Quraysh had sent 2 people to capture him. They came all the way to Medina. The Prophet had to surrender this Abu Basir to these 2 men who were sent to capture him. So they left Medina. In the middle of the way, Abu Basir managed to kill one of those captors. And the other person ran away from him, the other guard or the person. And instead of going all the way back to Mecca, he went to Medina to seek protection from the Prophet. This is a non-Muslim person from Mecca. And the Abu Basir is running after him. They arrive in Medina. This person, this guard or whatever, went to the Prophet and said, "Help me. This person is coming to kill me." So the Prophet said, this Abu Basir arrives in Medina and he meets the Prophet. I think they let him go, this other person. But the Abu Basir says to the Prophet, "You have kept your word, you have not broken the treaty. I am doing this out of my own free will. I have not joined the Muslim side, but I'm doing this out of my own free will. I've escaped captivity and I'm gonna do whatever I'm gonna do." So he leaves Medina and by himself he manages to attack caravans or whatever, people from Mecca. Keeps attacking people and killing, and taking captives and taking loot or booty. Other people from Mecca, other slaves, other runaway slaves join his side. They hear about Abu Basir, they join him. They become a force, a small army. I don't know if Abu Jandal joined him. Yeah. So Abu Basir has a small group of people, and they are very successful at attacking people, these caravans or whatever from Mecca. As at that point, Quraysh gives up. They send another delegation to the Prophet to ask him to change the conditions of the fourth condition in the treaty. Whoever wants to escape from Mecca and goes to the Muslims doesn't have to go back to Mecca. It was at that point that the treaty was 100% equal now. But as I mentioned before, Treaty of Hudaybiyah was a turning point. I will discuss in more detail as to how things changed, but the main point is that Quraysh finally accepted the Muslims as an equal partner, as a legitimate entity, a country or nation or whatever, and they made a peace treaty with them. And whereas prior to that, they did not recognize them as a legitimate, I don't know what you would call it, a state or whatever. That was all I had. If anybody has any other questions or comments.
I think Abu Basir, by the time he got to Medina, the Prophet passed away, so he never met the Prophet. I think that's what I remember.
Oh, it must have been somebody else, because he met the Prophet. And he said to the Prophet, you know, you've kept the treaty, you haven't broken the treaty.
Yeah, and I mean after he became.
Oh, afterwards. Oh, okay, yeah. Yep. Yep. Okay. Anything else? Anybody else? No? جزاكم الله خير. ستذكر ما أقول لكم وفوض أمر الله إن الله بصير بالعباد سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك